Justin Bibb leaving a charge to make sure downtown office buildings and apartments are safe and secure.
And for the first time, the mayor has sent a letter to a federal judge asking the judge to fast track a case that involves Fannie Mae and a downtown apartment and office complex because living and working conditions in that building are what he calls unacceptable. Mayor Bibb toured Reserve Square, an apartment complex and the home of several businesses, including 19 News. The city, in its letter to the federal judge, made it clear that city officials are well aware of the problems the people who live and work in Reserve Square are facing.
We've issued 85 violations.
The problems are widespread. 19 investigates found at least 18 complaints from December of last year to February of this year made to the Building and Housing Department from people who live or work in the Reserve Square building. 14 of them complained of no heat in one of the coldest stretches we've seen in years. The heat issues have reportedly been fixed.
Yeah, no resident, no worker should have to come to work or go home and not have a safe living place.
There are other clear major ongoing issues in the building. Flooding, for one. This major pipe near a loading dock exploded and flooded nearly an entire floor. All of this had led to cleaning companies working to mitigate the growing mold throughout the building multiple times.
Nobody should be working in these conditions anywhere in our city.
Reserve Square, owned previously by K&D, went into bankruptcy last year. Heyman Company was appointed by a court as the receiver of the property in August of last year. Heyman, in a letter to the judge hearing the federal case, claimed that the building had, quote, significant deferred maintenance, a lack of proper security, evidence of squatters in many of the over 400 vacant units, unsanitary conditions, and widespread pest infestation. While the receiver has made great progress on stabilizing the building, work is ongoing. But problems remain. False fire alarms are a frequent problem, lights and alarms. Also at issue, concrete that drops from the ceilings of the parking garage that puts people and cars at risk, plus frequent flooding in the garage that the receiver claims has been mitigated. Homeless people urinate and defecate in stairwells.
Have you lost staff because of the condition of the building?
Well, we've had people who simply won't come here. They won't show up because of their concerns. Gotcha. The mayor has approached the county's administrative judge about a dedicated, specialized docket that could streamline proceedings when a property goes into foreclosure.
How do we get these assets in local hands,
right,
with the local owner,
right,
who's going to invest responsibly?
Mayor Bibb opened that discussion with the judge because he said, unfortunately, this is a bigger problem than just Reserve Square, and it stands in the way of what he envisions for the city.
A safer city, a safer downtown. We need more people on the streets coming to work, going to lunch, going to happy hour, going to Cavs games, and Guardians games after work. We got to make sure we're creating that environment 24/7.